He says I give up and then he's gone.
All right. No,
There we
I'm
go.
here. I'm here. All right.
Looks like we're
It
live,
looks
right?
like we are actually live. Oh, for those who are at Riverside, we're going to have a long conversation about this platform in just a little while once this episode is over. But, anyways, let's go ahead and jump in. Let's get started. We've got a great show for everybody today. We are joined today with Stephanie Howard, Paul Spencer, Terry Fletcher. Unfortunately, Christine Hall and Scott Kraft were unable to make it to the program today, but we hope they're doing well and they are having a successful day. So, with that said, I want to start off with, I think, a very interesting topic. And when I posted about our show today and I listed one of the topics as being artificial intelligence, James Mitchell, who is a connection of mine, and I know he watches the show, when he's able to, shared with me a article about a group where he does the coding for them, and it's an oncology group, and they are utilizing a program for AI, and this program is they charge $20 if you want AI to read an image for you for your mammograms, and the program is called Lunit, Lunitai, and it is a program that allows the software to analyze mammograms to identify what they refer to as subtle patterns in the tissue, which helps physicians detect cancer during routine screenings. And in the case of this one particular individual who was getting the service done, she said, "Hey, when I saw that they were offering for $20 AI would take a look at it," she was like, "Sure, why not? Let's see what it does." And it showed an 85% chance of cancer in this one particular area. And with that said, when it showed that 85% chance of cancer, the doctor indicated that they wanted to go ahead and really focus their ultrasound into the left upper area, where these subtle changes were being identified by the AI program. And sure enough, as plain as day, according to this doctor, I think his name is Frostberg, and he's in Knoxville, Tennessee. Um, sure enough, there was the cancer, and they were able to effectively and efficiently diagnose the patient, accurately treat the patient, and get this lady well on the road to recovery. So I think this is an area where AI is really going to play a significant role in healthcare as it advances, as it becomes smarter. Um, there are, and again, I last week I had Andrew Livingston, who is an incredible resource on AI in healthcare. Join me on the Compliance Guy podcast. We had a great conversation. I know I've gotten some tremendous feedback from folks who have been able to listen to it thus far. But I want to talk about AI in another area, because I think, again, I'm not a clinician, so I can't really speak to the efficacy, the accuracy, the capabilities of AI from a clinician's perspective. Um, but I want to talk about it from an operational standpoint. I want to talk about it from a compliance standpoint because, again, Terry, Stephanie, Paul, you all are on the front lines. You're auditing provider documentation, and as many benefits that are available or could be available to providers utilizing AI, I think there's just as many pitfalls and as many trap doors waiting for some of the providers. So, if you all, from an auditing perspective, Stephanie, let's talk with you because you and I got to do a presentation last week to a group of about 25 physicians in Augusta, and we were discussing the role of AI and some of the things that they needed to be aware of. So let's start there. And then Paul and Terry, I want to come to both of you and get your thoughts as auditors, as educators, as, people really having their finger on the pulse with what's going on in our industry, to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on the evolution of AI and even the current role that it's playing.
Yeah, so with from the provider's perspective with that discussion last week and what I've seen in some of my work and discussions with providers one-on-one is that it can be utilized as a tool, but one of the things that concerns me from the compliance side is we need to make sure that the providers are taking it seriously enough to understand that they need to go back and look at that. And, Sean, I know that you speak often, just adding that little statement in there, just like we see now with, Dragon in voice to text software, providers would add that statement in there that says, oh, this was done this way, it could contain errors. Well, that's not enough. You need to look at it. You need to be confident in what this is generating. And, one of my concerns is what will we see from an individual patient perspective? So I don't know what this is going to look like from that output. And what I mean by that is if a provider is speaking into a microphone and that tool, that AI tool is helping them document, what's that going to look like? Are we going to still see the specifics to the patient, or is it going to spit out specifics to a diagnosis and it's going to look similar? So, those are the types of things I'm thinking of ahead of time. And then I've already had conversations with newer clinicians that were trying to use Chat GPT, for example, to diagnose patients. So, that's going to be another concern. I don't think that this is necessarily going to be as much of a concern with our established practitioners who've been in the industry for a while. But for those who are supervising, mentoring, whatever that may be on the clinical side, I think that's a real conversation you need to be having with the new providers coming into the industry, that that's not going to be your learning tool. That is why there are, clinical supervisors or collaborating physicians, things like that, to go to for advice to, work through that clinical side with a person. So that's where we need to be careful, but there's really going to not be a way to control that. When I found that with one of my clients last year, the person had just heard it from a friend of theirs and happened to mention it to me in our education session. So there's a lot of things that we really have to be proactive on because we don't know what people are going to do with them.
Right. The one thing I'm seeing too is when you're getting into teaching facilities in that situation, I'm noticing that some of the residents are counting on the AI instead of, as Stephanie mentioned, learning. And that concerns me as we move forward because those are going to be our new doctors coming in. And if they're relying on something that doesn't have safeguards, is for profit. I mean, remember that there's only one not for profit AI out there, and and it's not in healthcare. And so this is where we have to be careful because I think that's something we've all said: follow the money. And as soon as you follow it, you're going down a really dark rabbit hole sometimes. So it's not that AI isn't. I mean, it's coming like a freight train. We can't. There's no way out of it. But the problem is, like everything that seems to happen in this world, it seems oversight is secondary to making sure that it works prior to launching it. And so I've already seen in audits where the patient's HPI and all that information that comes in doesn't follow what I find at the bottom. And then I see that, like Stephanie said, I see that attestation or that salutation at the bottom that says, well, there could be errors, but that's not my fault. That's what AI did. And, prosecuting attorneys love that. They love doctors that say it's not my fault because the computer did it. And so, as somebody who's on both sides of the coin when it comes to auditing payer and physician, if I was auditing for a payer and I saw that, I'd be like, ask for the money back. They don't care. So, I'm having a hard time with AI in the capacity that providers seem to using it as a replacement instead as a tool. And as a tool to enhance what they're doing, that's one thing. But as a replacement for their thought process, that's, to me, that's dangerous. So Paul, I'll send it to you on that one.
Yep. Disclaimer statements are basically a way to just type at the bottom of the note, I didn't do this. And if it's not a true reflection of the service that you provided, and if it's not an accurate recitation of the service that's been provided to the patient, then it's invalid. And we had this problem going back, when I started reviewing documentation in the 2000s, I saw issues with voice to text where they're signing that documentation, and it's very clear from the voice to text and some of the things that the things like Dragon were saying that the providers said that this documentation was not reviewed. And basically, when you put that disclaimer on the bottom of a medical record, you're basically saying, I didn't look at this. This is kind of, this is, this is the best guess estimate of what the service was, and but I'm pretty confident that there's a level 4 or level 5 based on where the AI is pointing me. That's not the way to create medical documentation. And I hate to bring them up again 55, 56 years after the fact, but this is not what Larry Weed intended. I mean, his last book talked about using computers and, as part of electronic medical records to help in the diagnosis and treatment of patients. It was not about collating information from questionable sources into one spot and saying, this is the best I could come up with as far as medical decision making. And it's not something that AI can follow, because it basically, now that we have medical decision making is the only element that we're really looking at as far as determining a level of service. That's not something that's linear. That's a very non-linear way to diagnose a patient. It's just not going to happen with AI. It wasn't ready a year and a half ago when I presented this at the NAMUS conference, and it's not ready now.
Well, and Paul, that's a really good point, because one of the things that I've seen is that AI cannot do, like, it struggles, for example, with putting 2 out of 3 of the elements together. So I have a client who's been working on it, and I've been going behind and auditing the AI system, and it's really struggling with that particular part where, for example, our presenting problems may be easier to understand based on, okay, diabetes is going to be chronic and different things like that. But when you start to add in variables, it's struggling. And in addition to that, a large thing that I've seen is garbage in, garbage out. And it's, I've seen providers doing really bad documentation, but then also sitting in meetings and saying, oh, well, I found this way to get around the system, because they're getting frustrated with the roadblocks that AI can put in place for them to force them to be better. So they're just looking for other ways. So, I just find that interesting, because we hear about all these different things, and, who knows the outcome. But one last thing I want to say, I was told a few months back by someone who's working on AI technology, I guess, that auditors are going to be replaced. So they wanted to know if I wanted to come, work for them in a position as opposed to doing my own thing like I am now. Tried not to laugh, because again, I've been working with the system. Yes, it's a tool. It's awesome at pulling out and analyzing a note and pulling information quick that we can go back and look at. But with as much as we have to know about different payers and CMS and MACs and the federal level, sure, I'm sure it can process that, but someone's got to teach it to the system. And like I said, garbage in, garbage out. And that's what I'm seeing. So I don't I don't think that it's anything that we have to worry about replacing. I'm just thinking, okay, well, who's going to put in the cost, number one, and who's going to utilize it as a tool to help the efficiency of their team?
And I just got a client that used a company that did all their auditing through AI, and they had to self-report over $1 million back on for one specialty, almost 400,000 on another specialty, and we took it over. And I said, well, that's because the AI system missed, like Stephanie said, it missed the 2 out of 3. It missed certain reasoning. Does it have information? Yes, but it has information. It doesn't have necessarily auditing, reasoning, understanding the 2 out of 3, understanding when time is okay to use, understanding different specialties. And so, and also, there's still an issue with hallucinations because, I mean, look what our cell phones still do. The prompts, oh my gosh, they give you a prompt and you look down and go, that's not what I meant to say. AI does that still. So,
I just heard about that recently, Terry. I didn't even know what that was. The hallucinations with the programs.
The best way to describe it, and this is something everybody's heard, is one of the prompts for ruptured can be, ruptured appendix, ruptured Achilles, or whatever. And it seems to always want to say Achilles. And when you're, I had one that it was actually ruptured spleen, and they put in Achilles, and the doctor didn't check the note. And so it talk about a cascading effect as far as medicines, treatment, what went to other doctors within the EMR. I'm like, oh my gosh, this poor patient. And luckily it was able to be stopped before the patient, got something that was in the wrong spot on their body. But it was, and I said, you have to check your note. They said, well, I have staff to do that. I'm like, no, that's not the rule. It says you can use this. Look at AMA. I mean, it even says you can use these tools as long as you're going back and checking. And we are finding, just as when the new E&M guidelines came out, patients over paperwork, so you can spend more time with your patients so you don't have to do all the bullets for the history and exam. We're not finding that the doctors are utilizing that time they freed up to, spend more time with patients. They're getting more patients into that space. So instead of seeing 4 patients an hour, they're now seeing 6. So, anyone who thinks they're not making up with volume instead of, actually spending that time with the patient, look at your schedules. It's not what it doesn't happen the way you think it does. Sean, you're on mute, which I personally appreciate, but go ahead.
Ah, yes. There's
yeah.
that famous Terry comment once again. Okay. All right. So a couple things. I want to make certain that anyone and everyone who is engaged in utilizing AI within your organization for clinical documentation purposes understands the critical importance, even though while this is a new adaptation or adoption for medical practices to use AI, we still have to have policies. We still need to have procedures. We still need to make certain that not only our clinical providers understand how to use AI effectively, but that those within the organization from an IT perspective or those that are responsible for maintaining the system understand what the programs are. And if you're not familiar with a couple of the programs that are out there, such as NextGen's Ambient Assist or Epic's Augmented Response Technology, it's called ART. These are the programs that are assisting in the creation of clinical documentation. You have to understand also the importance of establishing medical necessity, which is not necessarily always done when AI is being used. So when we're talking about AI and we're talking about medical necessity, we need to help our providers understand that documentation has to accurately reflect the patient's clinical condition because it's essential in the diagnosing and treating of those conditions that the patient's presenting with. You've got to make certain that you're meeting all of the applicable regulatory and payer requirements based on what is referred to, and you guys hear me talk about this all the time, generally accepted standards of medical practice. And when we talk about generally accepted standards of medical practice, we're referring to established guidelines and expectations for healthcare services that are based on credible scientific evidence and recognized by the medical community, that are consistent with best practices for preventing, diagnosing, or treating illnesses. The other thing that is really critical for people to keep in mind when it comes to using AI in a medical practice is that patients have a right to opt out of using or having the provider use AI in their clinical documentation. So remember, patients have a right to request that their clinical documentation not be generated by any type or any allow for any modification via an AI assisted tool. So these are just some of the things like medical necessity, AI assisted documentation, patient opt out from utilizing AI that should be considered when you're creating a specific policy for your organization. Again, I think you need to address in your policy potential pitfalls. And what do some of those include? Well, it could be data quality and context. It could be biases and inaccuracies, like Terry was talking about before, with hallucinations. And remember, hallucinations in AI are very similar to hallucinations like what humans have. They are false positives. They can create things in the system, in the processing, that don't necessarily exist. So we want to be aware of things like hallucinations. We got to be aware of privacy and security. We got to be aware of the regulatory compliance. Remember, we have a lot of recent legislative initiatives, such as the 21st Century Cures Act, right? Which is very prevalent right now. There's emphasis on transparency and interoperability in healthcare technology. So again, compliance with these regulations is mandatory when implementing AI tools. I think it's important to understand the limitations that exist with early adoption of AI implementation. Again, error rates, like I said, hallucinations, integration challenges within the different EMRs, learning curves of your providers and other members of your team. So again, be thoughtful, be mindful, and be responsible when you are creating a policy within your organization on utilizing AI. A great a great document to take a look at is the recent settlement between Pieces Technologies in Texas and the Texas Attorney General's office for this organization under the State of Texas Deceptive Marketing Practices Act, which led multiple hospitals to acquiring this technology, but it wasn't functioning as they were advertising it. So they had to enter into a settlement agreement. So again, AI is prevalent, it's growing, it's adapting, it's touching every single aspect at this point of healthcare. From what I am seeing, everything from the clinical integration through operational streamlining, efficiencies, all of these different things. So be prepared, stay on top of this stuff, but make certain, for those of you who are compliance professionals in your organization, start working on creating an effective policy to help your staff, both clinical and non-clinical, understand their role in utilizing AI technology. All right. I know I said a whole bunch there. I hope that made sense for everybody. If no other questions, comments, or concerns on that, I want to jump, Stephanie, into a topic that you broached with the team earlier this morning. I know It's a big to do in the auditing world. This has been a highly problematic area for a long time. So let's jump in and let's talk about providers billing for evaluation and management services on the same date during the same visit as a minor procedure. And let's talk about the differences of, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, why it's not appropriate, and how these services need to be appropriately documented to cut down on the potential of adverse actions by auditors like Terry and others at the insurance companies looking at this documentation, trying to help their clients recover money that shouldn't have been paid.
Yeah, so this is, obviously a subject that we talk about a lot that is just, reoccurring constantly. And for me in my audit work, it's come back up and it's been pretty painful because what's happening is, practices when you have to have this conversation, they always think that their patient population is different. They think that their patient population's more complicated, so on and so forth. And the thing is, as consultants, we don't work with just one facility. We work with people all over the US, and they often say this to us. So, no, it's not just that particular area. Yes, there's times that specialties can, be highly specialized, like pediatrics or things like that. So, I don't want to downplay that side of it, but I'm saying it because that's always one of the rebuttals I get is that I'm telling them that the 25 modifier in an E&M is not supported because I don't understand how complicated their work is. So, with this situation, it goes back again to really what is included in the reimbursement of the procedure. And I find that a lot of times the providers and sometimes even the administrative staff at the different organizations don't realize that when a patient's coming in for something, especially when it's been previously determined, they've scheduled the appointment for that particular service. When that patient comes in, yes, you can do that examination as you see fit, but that examination is included in the reimbursement, as well as the decision to, yes, move forward with the performance of that procedure that day. And I'm finding recently when I'm getting pushback on this that they think that the performance of the exam, a discussion with the patient about moving forward or how they're doing, that part of it would support a separate E&M service, but we don't have any outcome of management, which is really going to be required not only for our leveling, but also for medical necessity. So, I feel like a broken record when we have to say this constantly, but I guess we've got to look at it from this other perspective because they're still coming back with, additional wording within their rebuttals and why they think they're different and why it should be warranted.
Well, and Stephanie and I were dealing with this in the past week too, from an education standpoint. Again, different specialties, say all the time, well, my patients are sicker. Okay. Well, there is this also a standard of medical care. Right now, we're seeing it within the osteopathic community with OMT and offices on the same day. And remember, typically OMTs on a schedule, and maybe you're also their primary care physician where you see them for their stable chronic conditions every 3 months. But if your schedule for the OMT is 2 or 3 times a month, just commenting that, continue your meds is not enough to get you another level 4 visit. And we see that all the time with the 25. And it even takes a step further where I'm starting to see where the training programs led by physicians are out there saying, well, this is how you need to word it to get it. And oh my gosh, you want to make me hot about something. That's documentation manipulation. I don't like it. Nobody likes it. The payers hate it and they know what you're doing. So, you have to be careful with that also, because remember, there are different copays, different out of pocket, different share of costs tied to some of these add-on services as well. And I mean, we've already talked before, we don't have to rehash the preventatives with E&M, but that's another area of concern. But also the planned procedures. I think that's one thing that you have to really be cognitive of is that when, I'll say orthopedic, when you're coming in for the 3 knee injections, let's say, now the initial visit, if they're being evaluated, they're trying to determine if that's the way you're going to go. Is it going to be injections? Are we going to clean up the knee with surgery? Are we just going to try PT? Whatever it is. I can support that as a visit with figuring out if you decide, okay, no, we're actually going to do the injection today. But then when you say, okay, Synvis is 3 injections, come back, and they put them on a schedule. And then when they come back, they're trying to also bill level 3 or 4. No, just to say, hi, how are you? We're going to do an injection. That's not appropriate. And then I'll see a physician say, well, they also said that, their arm hurt or their shoulder hurt. And we call these, oh, by the way, visits. Unless those visits required an additional complete workup, different from the pre and post work that's included in that procedure, then that's not, again, appropriate to add that E&M. But remember, all you're doing is flagging yourself for an audit. You're just triggering yourself for an audit to do this. And it's becoming such a problem right now that everyone's always worried about a Medicare audit. I'd start getting concerned about commercial plan audits. They're seeing the millions of fraud, waste, and abuse that Medicare has been finding over the last several years. And now they're out there going, you know what, our turn. Have you seen that, Sean? I've been seeing that like crazy.
Yeah. So again, I will tell you that, and I share this with every single one of my clients. The commercial payers are as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than what I'm seeing at the federal payer level. Humana, Cigna, Aetna, the Blues, United, they are all guns blazing. And I will tell you, I agree with probably, Paul, what would you say, about 30% of the findings and rationales that we're getting from some of them? Look, it's not that their auditors are doing a bad job. It's that I think there is so much open to interpretation, especially when you start, Terry, and I know you and I have had these conversations in the past and we're going to have them in the future. There's so much subjectivity when it comes to things like evaluation and management services. There's so much subjectivity when it comes to things like clinical judgment, medical decision-making, what should and should not be counted in the time aspect of an evaluation and management service. The application of an old LCD to a service where new LCD, or vice versa. We have a new LCD, but they're trying to make it retroactive to services that were being rendered prior to that new LCD. So again, and Paul, we're seeing this extensively. I mean,
actually, I'm just to interrupt real quick before, because I know Paul has something to say on this. You just mentioned something, Sean, that I think people miss. If you're doing a preventative service and you're doing an E&M, did you know you can't do time? Yeah. It's right in the CPT book. They said because preventative doesn't have a time component, because you have to have a comprehensive history and exam. They were talking about recently, I think it was United Healthcare. They're like, you can't use time. And then I saw it on Medicare and I was like, you guys, it's right here. And then it found it in the AMA. And all of a sudden I'm seeing practices going, well, I spent 35 minutes for this patient, and then I did the preventive. Like, no, once you split that bill, your medical decision making and preventative, if it's necessary, you can't even use time, and that's been an issue. So I just want to put that in there. Yeah,
but 100% agree with you. But the other thing, Paul and I and Stephanie, we're receiving probably a half a dozen inquiries a week from clients around the country, those who are not clients, from law firms representing medical practices, hospitals, health systems, saying, hey, our client just got a 6-figure demand from the SIU at United or from Aetna. I mean, and the demands aren't like $1,000, $5,000. I mean, we're talking significant money. We're talking 6 figures. $100,000, $300,000, $500,000. I mean, some of these amounts are unbelievable. And of course,
Sean, real quick on that.
Yeah.
Some people are getting letters from these different SIU
Yep.
divisions, and it's a small amount. So they're thinking, oh, we could pay this and move on. But then I go in and look at the letter and it's like, oh no, we've got a real issue, because they can go back and
That's
look
right.
to extrapolate and all of
Yep.
that. So yeah, people are not recognizing what the investigative units are, and that's a
Yeah.
big problem.
Spot on. A mutual connection and mutual friend to several of us on here. Their company has extensive contracts with the special investigative units of some of the different insurance companies. And, you know, I tell people all the time, irrespective of the amount, one, at least acknowledge, don't just write a check, at least acknowledge and let them know that you have received their letter, that you have taken it under advisement, under consideration, that you take these things very seriously, that you, as part of your own culture of compliance within your organization or your own policies, in the event that there's an audit or a demand for overpayment refund, that you are or have embarked on conducting your own independent investigation, audit, utilizing a objective third party to take an independent look at your documentation. While you have uncovered some nuanced issues, you disagree with the overall assertion. However, you have decided that, you know, there are documentation issues that we have addressed through corrective action plans, whatever it is. And moving forward, we have rectified this problem. Because if you don't, and I tell this to people all the time, if you don't, you are painting a target on your back that says, come and kick me. You are the Marty McFly of your high school, where it says, kick me on your back, and they will do it. So don't just write a check, okay? Don't just write a check and issue a refund. Make sure, if you are going to issue a refund, that you give some explanation, you give some insight as to corrective action steps that you're taking to rectify the situation so it doesn't go forward. But, you know, do your best to try to explain the rationale for why it happened. And then you brought up something really important, Stephanie, and this is the last thing, unless it sparks some more discussion. These SIUs, especially those working, you know, in the program integrity arena for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that are claiming to do statistically valid random samples, what we call an SVRS, or they're doing SSOEs, statistical sampling for overpayment estimations. Don't just believe them. Make certain that they are complying, especially those that are working on behalf of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Make certain that they are complying with all of the requirements of Chapter 8 of the Medicare Program Integrity Manual, specifically starting at 8.4 all the way through, I believe it's 8.4.9, because it talks about when statistical sampling can be deployed. If they don't meet all of these requirements for using statistical sampling, then they actually have to get approval from a COR with a CC to a BLD or BLO, whatever it is. There's different acronyms they use. And then request their worksheets. You have a right to do that. You have a right to make certain that the person who drew the sample, if they don't possess the requisite skills and education in statistical sampling and accounting, that they actually have to consult with a statistical expert. And it's very rare that I find these statistical samples and post-audit extrapolations are done correctly, because they're not testing for repeatability, reliability. You know, they're not showing us the sample frames. We don't understand how they're arriving at the universe. And, you know, they may try to use fancy, you know, statements like, you know, utilizing a Monte Carlo simulation. Well, a Monte Carlo simulation is only going to show you replication. It doesn't tell you whether or not what was entered was done correctly to be able to create the sample frames based on the universe for then the post-audit extrapolation based on seed values, point estimates, error rates, all those other things that come into play. And I'm kind of missing Christine Hall right now because I know she spent like 18 weeks taking a course on statistics and learning how to do this. And I know she's passionate about that. But my point in sharing all of this with our audience today is to make certain that you don't just stroke a check because you think it's the easy route. It's
Well, and I also
often
want
the
to
worst. Go ahead,
bring
Terry.
up something too.
Yes.
Well, because I think sometimes we throw out acronyms and people don't know what they are. So SIU is Special Investigations Unit. And these special investigations units are insurance carrier personnel that are responsible for investigating insurance claims believed to be suspect or fraudulent. I get at least once a week from a large payer. I just got one, and they actually just hired me to look at some claims. And they're basically saying, we have a problem. We have a doctor who's using time for everything, same time stamp for everything. And we just don't believe that, to take out a splinter, it should be 40 minutes. But it says in AMA, CPT, see, Paul thinks I'm funny, said that, the doctor can use time and we're supposed to believe it, but we don't believe it. So what can we do? And I said, well, remember, the unbelievable day, you can always look at that. That's actually a Medler and Matters you can always refer to. I said, but the other thing too is that what you can look at, because you can look at time as well as that. I said, pull their scheduling. I said, pull their schedule. And she's like, oh my gosh, we didn't even think of that. And I said, if they're using 40 minutes every time, that means they can see 1.5 patients an hour. I said, so, that you do the math. So they looked at that, and it turned out they were seeing 45 patients a day and billing all on time and billing all level 4s and 5s and not being met. And she couldn't thank me enough. She's like, okay, so now we need you to look at about 200 claims for us. She goes, because we're having a problem. I'm like, all right, let's take a look. So, I'm halfway through it, and I already see that half should have been medical necessity and some of it was fine. But the ones on time, I totally agree that this is wrong. And so it's interesting, but just going back to the SIU, if you see that you're getting a letter and it says Special Investigations Unit, something is off. Something doesn't look right. I want to get Paul's, take on that, because I'm sure he's seen that as well, and probably got a question from one of your clients saying, hey, what do we do now?
Oh, so many things to cover. I've been somewhat silent for a while, but so first, the thing most prominent, we just had a client who came to us for audit services that they didn't even realize what the SIU letter was in the office that they had. And it kind of sat there. And then they realized when they got the results letter saying lack of documentation, hey, there must have been a letter somewhere from the SIU asking for documentation. At the very least, have somebody open up the mail, and have somebody who knows what to recognize open up that mail. It's so easy to get these things lost. I've been preaching this for 15 years, and I can't believe that I still have to teach practices how to open their mail. It's not all checks, and most of your checks are coming electronically. Open things that come there with an insurance imprimatur on them in the upper left-hand corner. It's probably important. Second of all, with I want to go back to the beginning a little bit, because we're talking a lot about the output and the results of the things that you're billing. Let's go back to the very beginning. Do you even know what your billing risk is? When you're doing analytics, are you even looking at your modifier usage, or particularly the usage of modifier 25 and 59, which have been problematic for almost 30 years? It's really important to take a look at that from an analytical standpoint. It's not about, well, we bill 60% level 4s and can we support that? Look at your modifier usage as well and whether you can support that. Let's talk, a little bit about the 24 modifier too. I see a lot of E&M services in a post-op period where they try to split out a 24. You better have a good handle on that. And then doing practice risk assessments really falls into the analytical stuff that you're doing, but it's very important to put that forward. And the last thing I would do is, if you're going to add 25 modifiers at a heavy rate and you feel that you can defend them, you better have a coding policy in writing that you can refer to that at least was checked by somebody outside your organization, not just we use the 25 and that's that, and nobody can question us. It has to be a verified, and it has to be an expert reviewed type of coding policy that you have in your office that's going to say, this is when we use the 25 modifier, and we feel that it is appropriate when we do use that 25 modifier. If you are on a stand and you're trying to defend a medically appropriate history and a medically appropriate exam in order to build a 25 modifier, you better be right. Because the high level of subjectivity of those two phrases really have not been defined, and we're 3.5 years into a new E&M world where we say medically appropriate history, medically appropriate examination, and it's up to the provider to determine what that is. We better have some background other than this very vague statement in the assessment plan that says arm pain, in addition to that knee injection that you're doing that day. And then you kind of have this amorphous plan of care, and it doesn't look like you assessed it at all. You just kind of asked a question. And
Paul, we have a client that
Yeah.
Stephanie and I are working with that said that he doesn't have to do an exam because it's up to the doctor what's a medically appropriate exam. And I'm like, wait, what? He says, because the AMA says it doesn't, it's up to the doctor what it looks like, that he doesn't have to have one. And try arguing that. Try arguing that back, going, okay, so how, without an exam, do you show that you need to move on with diagnostics or treatment? They're like, well, because we just have a discussion. We just go over labs. And I'm like, all right, but I'm seeing level 4s and 5s. What the heck?
Yeah.
And he's like, he goes, yeah, I can justify that. I'm like,
other than a troponin level that's 8 times the normal,
Exactly.
I don't know what justifies arm pain from a laboratory standpoint.
Yeah. Or a
Point
palpated mass, or chest pain. I mean, well, chest pain, I guess, but things that you have to touch the patient to find out. But some of these arguments, I think, are self-inflicted because the AMA has given terrible direction. I mean, we always talk about Medicare speak. I mean, we wait for those, MedLearn Matters, things that publications that they put out to try to figure out what they meant in the transmittal. And we're still waiting. I mean, HHS, we still don't have a Medicare administrator. And so we're trying to figure out, we just have a, one that's acting. And so we haven't had any of those MLMs for a long time. And we're hoping that, Secretary Kennedy gets on the ball here. But the one thing that we're having a hard time with is the fact that there's so much, and I hate this word, ambiguity. It's like, well, just let the doctor do this, or, well, if they feel that this is fine. And this is not to say anything against providers. I love you guys. I love you gals. I love all of you, right? We need you. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jobs. But in saying that, don't you feel, and again, feel free to comment to Sean, not to me, but if you have any, if you have guidelines, if you have templates that I know you use, when you have direction, I feel it makes you a little bit a better physician to at least have some direction, instead of saying, do what you want and then figure out if it's the right thing later. I'm having such a hard time with, again, the ambiguity, the gray areas, the areas that are not specifically defined. And this is the last thing I'll say on that is, and I keep going back to Stephanie, we're working on this one client together. So we beat our heads daily, but we can give published guidance from AMA, then we give it from Medicare, then we give it from their specific MAC carrier, then we even find stuff from the FDA, and they're still like, well, do you have anything else? Just like, how far do we have to take this? Do you want us to go sit in the Oval Office and go, can you make an executive order? Because we can't get through.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're doing now.
Yeah. Because my well-informed colleague told me this.
So
they're doing it down the street, right?
So you led me to the trough, and I'm gonna drink now, Terry, as that horse that often likes to take off on a gallop. About a week ago, our newly nominated and approved through the advise and consent process through the Senate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is now serving as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, pushed out a memo and a directive to those departments that fall under his purview, which was, we are no longer going to engage with the public on comments as it relates to, yes, this was pushed out. With respect to material changes in regulatory governance through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, through the Department of Health and Human Services, because it does not breed efficiency and it does not aid in the streamlining process. Okay, so that's just
they never listen to the comments anyway, Sean. They just do whatever they want. I haven't seen comments change their mind.
I'm going to show you where they finally have. But I agree with you in the most, Terry, because you and I have been on a lot of these public calls, and they don't take my comment. They don't take my questions. They've taken yours, but they don't take mine. But here's the thing. It was one of the dumbest directives I think they could have pushed out, because the APA requires that generally public comment has to be sought for any new proposed regulations or regulatory changes or material changes to regulations. And I think it was one of the dumbest directives that could have been pushed out. Now, with that said, I'm hoping that they have gotten a barrage of nasties over the last week to 10 days, encouraging them not to do that. But I want to share with everybody the reason why I think public commenting is so important. And I am going to actually share a screen with everybody right now. And hopefully everybody can see this. There was a material change in the local coverage determination tied to skin substitute grafts for cellular and tissue-based products for the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers, DFUs and VLUs, okay? This is the first time in the history of me addressing LCDs that I am actually going to say, this is an excellent LCD. It is excellent. It is extremely long. It is 70 pages in length, but this LCD is a direct cause of, and it goes into effect, I believe it's April 1st, if I'm not mistaken. This is a direct cause of engaging public comment, because we got a tremendous amount of feedback, a tremendous amount of clinical insight, and this LCD is going to be significantly beneficial to providers, because as you will see, as I kind of scroll through here for you, they have done a great job between the proposed LCD that has been in existence versus the final LCD that goes into effect on April 1st. And it shows you all of these different terms. It shows you all of the changes that has transpired. It talks about what CMS's national coverage policy is. There's great citations to where you can find all of this critical information. Here's your coverage guidance, but I want to just scroll way through here, because look at this now. Each one of these is laid out for you by, like, for example, here's Apligraft, okay? And this is formerly skin graft or graft skin. And it talks about the clinical uses, the clinical indications, the efficacy, what they have seen from their clinical studies. There are numerous charts that are in here. This is such a great LCD from the standpoint of arguing medical necessity and why these grafts are applicable. So again, this goes into effect on April 1st. It is a fantastic LCD. I have not been able to say that in the past with a lot of LCDs. I will finish off my statement by saying this. It is still an LCD, which means that it does not have the effect of law. It is a coverage determination that aids payers and the MACs in payment determinations. You still have a right as a clinical provider to argue clinical relevance, to argue clinical judgment, all of those things on an appeal. But I will tell you, this one you should find as significantly of benefit to you as a provider if you are treating diabetic foot ulcers or venous leg ulcers. All right. Paul, Stephanie, Terry, Terry, you told me not to bother you about this one, so I'm going to leave you alone. But Stephanie or Paul, any initial thoughts on this, what is considered to be a future, near future LCD or the accompanying LCA that goes along with it?
So the one thing that jumps out at me about this is that it's still a future LCD as it's marked. Date of effective date of April 13th, I believe it was on the first page. But the one thing that this shows and demonstrates is that they took the advice of the people who actually read the LCD and the people who perform these services in this MAC jurisdiction to come to a policy that is comprehensive. It's about as close to complete as I've ever seen an LCD. There's a real lack of amorphous language across the 70 pages. The only concern I have, and this will find this out in, just doing the quick math, about 34 days, is whether this future LCD of 70 pages is actually a 70-page finalized LCD, or whether this is something that where they are showing the thought process. I believe and hope that it's going to be in its current form and they just remove the future tag from page 1 and we're done. Yep. But it also points out the folly of not taking advice, particularly from the medical community is going to be performing the services. Yep. And LCDs are not for office visits, and they're not for intramuscular injections. These are usually for procedures and services of a higher complexity where specialists have to get involved and they have to provide these services. You have to listen to them in order to get to the door of creating an LCD. Yep. And we found that out before, particularly with biologic skin substitutes, specifically amniotic skin substitutes. So very important to have this information, very important to have the back and forth and the feedback and the discussion before policy is put forward. We're seeing an opposite world version of this would be urine drug screenings.
Right.
And all of the things that we've dealt with urine drug screenings over years and years across multiple states, across multiple MAC jurisdictions, because one side, and I guess you can guess what side it is, isn't listening.
That's right.
When we're talking about state guidelines.
That's right. All right. Well, that's going to bring us right to the end of this episode. I want to thank Stephanie Howard, Paul Spencer, Terry Fletcher so much for, as always, their great insight, their great topics that they bring to the show each and every single week. To each and every single one of you who has tuned in, logged on, hung out with us for just a little while, thank you so much. As always, me personally, I will try to do better next time, but our team, they're at the top of their game. So with that said, Terry and I are going to be back tomorrow with an all brand new #Terry Tuesday episode. I can't wait to hear what Terry throws at me tomorrow. So until then, remember, be good to yourself, but more importantly, y'all be good to each other. Take care. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.